morning. Our reading is taken from Rays of the One Light by Swami Kriyananda, which are weekly commentaries on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. This week's reading, Who Are True Christians? Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. Jesus Christ said in chapter 10 of the Gospel of St. John, "All that ever came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them." Many Christians, not surprisingly, quote this saying in condemnation of other spiritual teachers, not only the Old Testament prophets, but also Buddha, Krishna, and others who lived before Jesus, as well as, by inference, any who came after him. Yet Jesus himself said in St. Matthew chapter 5, "Think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill." Nowhere do we find Jesus condemning or even gently criticizing other spiritual masters. His criticisms were reserved for worldly attitudes and for those hypocritical Pharisees who had allowed religion to become for them a pretense. Paramahansa Yogananda explained that the expression, "all that ever came before me," referred to those spiritual teachers who placed their egos and their self-importance ahead of the Christ consciousness, in the sense of drawing people's devotion to themselves and not offering it where it alone truly belongs, to God. Yogananda himself was very firm in this regard. For example, he never spoke of anyone as his disciple. Instead, he always insisted, they are God's disciples. God is the guru, not I. Ego is a way station on the soul's journey toward enlightenment. The soul is first trapped in lower bodily forms. Slowly it evolves to the human level, at which point self-consciousness appears. Only in human form can self-consciousness transcend material form altogether, including the lower identity of ego consciousness, and discover the true divine self within. Self-consciousness manifested as ego is an incentive to deliberate self-development. Later in this process of development, however, the ego becomes an obstruction. Inevitably, new spiritual aspirants do not emerge effortlessly from the vortex of ego consciousness. Desire must be offered up resolutely and ever more wholeheartedly on the altar of infinity. It is a gradual process, and few, even among those who seek to help others, are free of ego. If, however, their motive in teaching is not to serve, but to be served, they deserve a severe reprimand as Jesus gave them. For their direction of development is no longer upward, but downward. In the name of giving up desires, they are creating new ones. As it says in the Bhagavad Gita in the 3rd chapter, "Desire obscures even the wisdom of the wise. Their relentless foe it is, a flame never quenched. Intellect, mind, and the senses, these combined are referred to as the seat of desire. Desire through them deludes and eclipses the discrimination of the embodied soul. O Arjuna, discipline your senses, and having done so, work to destroy desire, annihilator of wisdom and of self-realization. Give God the credit for everything you do. See him as the true doer." Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Oh.
Okay. Me too. We already mentioned that the topics today are who are the true Christians and inspiration. Inspiration comes from the meaning in it is to breathe in. And yogis know that breath is tied to the movement of consciousness. Okay? When we feel uplifted, we feel centered and whole, we feel inspired. And when we feel down and out, we don't. We pass from this world by expiring. Our energy goes down and out. It leaves. When we are inspired, the energy comes into the center, comes up, and is connected to the source. And I wanted to read on the strength of that. I wanted to read this beautiful little poem or reading from Whispers from Eternity. This is literally a gospel. Yogananda said he came for several purposes. One of them was to show, to carry Kriya Yoga into the world and serve those who are seeking communion with God. Another thing was to show the comparison, show how closely related the Eastern teachings and the Western teachings are by comparing the teachings of Krishna and the Bhagavad Gita and the Bible and showing how they are the same. And so every week we read comparative readings and show that the same truth is the same truth no matter where you go. But then he said he also came to bring this body of prayer demands and poems. They are fraught with inspiration. Every one of these, he said, he had received a divine response from. So this one is a particularly special one. Endless Thrills of Delight, number 199. I attuned my life with thine. Now my life has become a long, unbroken inspiration. Thy fountain of bliss refreshes and delights me night and day, whether I be wakeful, fast asleep, or dreaming fondly of thee. Oh, what has become of me? Delight on overwhelming delight, endless, indescribable thrills of divine delight spray unceasingly over me. O aged nectar, wine of centuries, I found thee at last and will taste of thy sweetness forever, forever, forever. Om. The masters come. God comes in the form of a spiritual master as an avatar. Whenever virtue declines and adharma is on the rise, God comes in human form to reestablish virtue. And if you look around, it appears that adharma is on the rise and virtue a bit on the decline. And so these great masters, and not just today, I mean, it's been building now. It's been building for quite some time. If you recall, Jesus incarnated in a time where adharma was pretty ripe, and he established a guidepost. His life provided a point of reference. And if you think about what it took to establish that point of reference, it was not a meek or timid gesture. He didn't just show up and say, hey, you guys, follow me, it'll all be great. He came with a tremendous power, and that tremendous power was anchored in his communion with God. There was nothing else. I attended a conference not long ago. It was the monastic order meeting, annual monastic order meeting that we have, the Sevaka order, down at Ananda Village. And Jyotish, Nayaswami Jyotish was talking, and he was talking about our lives and our happiness and our effectiveness. And he was saying, you know, it's like we're in a hot room and we're trying to fan ourselves. And we got this fan going, we're just, if we do this a lot, we can kind of get the wind blowing, kind of get, feel a little better and stuff. But it's a lot of work. And after a while, you get tired and you stop fanning and you get hot again. And that's what we try and do. We try and inspire ourselves. We try and make life work. And he said, the masters, God comes to us and he said, and God tells us through these masters, he says, attune yourself to the divine. There is a force that underlies all of creation that if you attune yourself to it, will flow through you. And he said, it's like going over, it's not like going over and getting a bigger fan. It just wears you out faster. But he said it's like going over and getting an electric fan and plugging it into the socket. And all of a sudden, you've got this cooling motion, you've got this movement, you've got this, and you're not doing it. You had to plug in, of course. But all of a sudden, there's a force that is not obvious that is carrying you forward. And he said, that's the story. That's what Jesus came to bring. You know, in that beautiful little reading we just had, it didn't talk about race. It didn't talk about color. It didn't talk about economic conditions. It didn't talk about culture. It didn't talk about anything. We had a beautiful, I want to thank Lorna and the team who were active last night. Every year we have Guru Night. And it's 3 hours dedicated to tuning in to this ray of the divine through these masters. Right now, they're just pictures up there, but during Guru Night, people set up for sometimes days in advance, but they get ready, and they create altars to each one of these masters. And then we go from place to place, and we tune into the ray of the divine, the aspect of the divine light that they brought into this world in response to our yearning for wholeness. And then we listen and we feel. And it's always remarkable. It's outside. It's very casual. It's a little funky. You carry your chair around. All the altars are leaning with the topography. It's all, the wind blows out candles. There's all kinds of stuff on the surface. It's just a little bit, simplistic and a little bit innocent. But it for many people, for most of us, many of us, it's one of the most powerful nights of the year, because we go and we chant, we pray, we listen to stories about their lives, we meditate, we do an offering or receive something from the altar. And somehow, in the process of all of that self-forgetfulness and tuning in, there's this great upliftment of energy and inspiration, so that by the time we've gone through all 5 of the shrines, there's just this glow in the hearts of everybody there and a glow in the property. And that's it. That's the call of Spirit to each one of us, to be so lost in the experience of God, not just the thought, although the mind has to be absorbed also, but the experience of God's presence, that all the rest of the stuff just goes away, and all there is a sense of joy. In that uplifted state, everything else becomes obvious. Everything else becomes clear, and we can feel what direction to take. We can feel what's trying to happen and how to cooperate with it. Melissa, would you do me a favor? Would you go get a copy of Autobiography of a Yogi? Thank you so much. See, this is an inspired talk today. I didn't have any idea what I was going to say. I knew what my reading was going to be, and I figured that out about 3 minutes before coming down here. But it's part of what we get to learn. Part of what we need to learn along the way is how to live in the moment. I always get nervous when God doesn't give me a talk beforehand. Thank you so very much. Because, it would be embarrassing to be up here and say nothing. And there's often times I wonder if there's anything going to be said. I'd like to find a moment. Here we go, if we can find it. It's from a moment in cosmic consciousness. And it is Outwitting the Stars, The Cauliflower Robbery, An Experience in Cosmic Consciousness. Here it is. Yogananda is talking, if you haven't had the chance to do this, I heartily encourage you to go and visit every saint you possibly can. Be around people who live in the presence of God. because it's so darn much fun. In 1991, we visited India, and we toured to many places, and we met many saintly people. A part of that visit was we spent time with Mother Teresa. And we got up at 4 o'clock in the morning and went, and we joined them in Mass. And it was a beautiful moment. It still rings sharply in my mind, because there they were, a room full of Indian women in nuns' habits, kneeling in prayer. And there we were, a bunch of white, pasty Westerners sitting in the back in yoga meditation posture. And the juxtaposition was just so remarkable. It reminded me, actually, of a little time later. I was in Italy, and we were on the steps of the Duomo, which is this great cathedral. And on the steps, I was just watching. We were in the piazza, and on the steps, there were a bunch of Italian Hare Krishnas chanting their little hearts out, and there was an Indian woman in nun's habit walking by, giving them a dirty look. This is why the masters keep coming back, okay? They come and they tell us, they show us, and then we forget, and we really miss the boat. Savonarola was an expression of really missing the point of Christianity. But Yogananda goes into this state of ecstasy. He goes into samadhi. He goes into a state of absolute absorption in spirit, and then he comes back out of it. He comes back down, and when he comes back out, his guru, he goes to fall at his guru's feet in gratitude for the blessing of that divine experience. And his guru lifts him up and hands him a broom and says, "Do not get over drunk with ecstasy. There's much work to be done," and has him sweep the patio. Okay? For all those who are involved in karma yoga, don't get over drunk with ecstasy. There's much work to be done in this world in service, and also to keep us from getting lost in just the inner experience. God is also out here. But if we get lost out here and don't have the inner experience, it is terrifying. So Yogananda, he says to his master, he says, "Sri Yukteswar, I had this experience, but tell me, when will I find God?" And Sri Yukteswar says, "Oh, really? So what do you think just happened? I'm sure you're not expecting a venerable personage adorning a throne in some antiseptic corner of the cosmos. I see, however, that you are imagining that the possession of miraculous powers is knowledge of God. One might have the whole universe and find the Lord elusive still. Spiritual advancement is not measured by one's outward powers, but only by the depth of his bliss in meditation. Ever new joy is God. He is inexhaustible. As you continue your meditations during the years," and here's some really priceless, I would just give you this as something to meditate on across the years. "As you continue your meditations during the years, he will beguile you with infinite ingenuity. Devotees like yourself who have found the way to God never dream of exchanging him for any other happiness. How quickly we weary of earthly pleasures. Desire for material things is endless. Man is never satisfied completely and pursues one goal after another. The something else he seeks is the Lord, who alone can grant lasting joy. I understand now, sir, why the saints call the Lord unfathomable. Everlasting life could not suffice to apprise him." "That's true," says Sri Yukteswar, "but he is also near and dear. After the mind has been cleared by Kriya Yoga of sensory obstacles, meditation furnishes a twofold proof of God. Ever new joy is evidence of his existence, convincing to our very atoms. Also, in meditation, one finds his instant guidance, his adequate response to every difficulty." And Yogananda goes on to say, "I see, you have solved my problem. I do realize now that I have found God, for whenever the joy of meditation," and here it is, "whenever the joy of meditation has returned subconsciously during my active hours, I have been subtly directed to adopt the right course in everything, even details." So it's in the depth of meditation that we make contact, and then when we stay in tune with that joy that is God, we're unerringly guided to the right choice in even details. That is ultimate inspiration. The real Christians, Mother Teresa, she said, in talking with her, she said, I want you to know, I have work in 93 countries at this point. We serve the poorest of the poor. But I don't do it because I think it's a good thing. Although I think it's a good thing. I don't do it because I see Jesus in those who I serve, although I see Jesus in those who I pick up. I do it because it's what God asks of me. I do it because it's what God asks of me. And there's a story a little while later of a journalist having heard something similar to this in another interview. And he said, "Mother, I understand you do God's will." And she looked at him and she said, "Well, of course I do. What do you do?" The joy we're seeking, the wholeness we're seeking is not far away. It's a breath away. It's a moment of relaxation away. It's always there, waiting to express through us. And all that's missing is our own willingness to enter stillness, our own willingness to uplift our consciousness and listen, be in tune. I'd just like to close with this repeat of the same reading because it's so beautiful. I attuned my life with thine. Now my life has become a long, unbroken inspiration. Thy fountain of bliss refreshes and delights me night and day, whether I be wakeful, fast asleep, or dreaming fondly of thee. Oh, what has become of me? Delight on overwhelming delight, endless, indescribable thrills of divine delight spray unceasingly over me. O aged nectar, wine of centuries, I found thee at last, and will taste of thy sweetness forever, forever, forever. Moment of silence.
This song, is called Blessed Are They. It's from Swami Kriyananda's oratorio, Christ Lives. And it's based on, the words are from Matthew 5, and it's part of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount that he delivered by the Sea of